Shilian soothed. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to do anything. I only want to check your injuries. That child, however, pressed his hands harder, revealing only one large obsidian eye, looking panicked. But this panic didn't seem like he was afraid that he would get beaten, but rather that something would be discovered. Looking at his little face, half covered with only an eye, Shilian suddenly thought that he might have seen this child somewhere and squinted his eyes. Chirong saw his upset face and explained, "Cousin Crown Prince, that little fiend ruined your grand ceremony yesterday, so I avenged you. Don't worry, I was careful. He won't die." Sure enough, the child held in his arms was the one who fell from the city wall during the Shangyuan heavenly ceremonial procession the day before. No wonder Shilian thought that he looked familiar. This little child hadn't even changed. He was still wearing the same outfit as the day before, but because of all the beating and dragging, he was filthier and looked nothing like he had before. He didn't even look like he was the same person. Shilian couldn't hold back his anger. "Who told you to avenge me? It has nothing to do with this child. It wasn't his fault." Chirong justified himself. "Of course it's his fault. If not for him, you wouldn't have gotten scolded by the Gosha." This ruckus was growing out of hand, and the crowd watching was becoming bigger, all whispering to each other. Just then, Muqing also approached, and Chirong pointed his whip at him, his expression laced with hostility. "And you lowly servant, just by the looks of him, I can tell he doesn't know his place. If you don't discipline him, sooner or later he's going to overthrow and step on you, the master. I helped you to discipline him, but you turned around and defended him instead, and told on me too. Now uncle and auntie not only disregarded my goodwill, they even confiscated my golden carriage. Cousin, that was my birthday gift. I've wanted it for over 2 years." Muqing gave Chirong an unreadable, sweeping look. Shilian puffed a laugh from rage. "I don't need your goodwill, not like this. Are you really avenging me, or are you avenging yourself?" Chirong said, "Cousin, why would you say that to me? And what have I done wrong in following after you?" Shilian couldn't argue with him. "Chirong, listen here. From now on, you're not allowed to touch this child, not even a finger. Do you hear me?" Just then, Shilian suddenly felt a pull on his neck. He was just at the height of his fury and was startled. He looked down and saw that the young child had buried his face in his chest, his 2 hands tightly encircled around Shilian's neck. Shilian felt him shake uncontrollably and thought that he was hurting. He asked hurriedly, "What's wrong?" The young child was covered all over in mud, grime, and blood, filthy and unkempt, and it all smeared onto Shilian's white robe, but Shilian didn't mind it at all. He gently patted the child's back to comfort him, and said in a gentle voice, "I'll go take you to the doctor right now." That child didn't respond, but he hugged Shilian even tighter. He was tense and wouldn't let go, as if he was holding onto a lifeline. Chirong saw that Shilian wouldn't acknowledge his goodwill, his heart solely on outsiders, then saw that the kid had sullied Shilian's white robes with that bloody, muddy shit, and his anger flared. He raised the whip and was about to lash the back of the child's head. Fengxin was standing on the side, and in a split second his leg flew out and kicked Chirong right on the arm. There was a loud crack, and Chirong screamed. The whip fell to the ground, and his right arm dropped limply at an abnormal angle. He was frozen in disbelief, and it was a while before he slowly raised his head, glaring at Fengxin, enunciating each word. "You dare break my arm." His words were extremely cold. It was only after he kicked that Fengxin realized what he had done, and his face changed. But Mu Qing's face changed even more. It was no matter how they detested Qi behind his back. That was one thing. But as a personal guard, to have transgressed and accidentally broken the arm of royalty, that was something completely different. Just then, Shilin had his hands full with that child, and behind him were many onlookers, so he couldn't dodge. But if he had dodged, it would have been a piece of cake. Only Qi came at him with such aggression, and so out of the blue, Fengxin moved too fast without thinking, and Shilin didn't have the chance to stop him. Now everything was in even more of an uproar, and Shilin didn't have time to think. His clothes were getting soaked in blood. If he delayed any longer, the child might just die right there. Shilin made a split-second decision, inhaled deeply, and shouted in a clear voice, "Everyone, if anyone was pulled into this incident today, please record any damages and loss. I will take all responsibility without fail." Then he turned to Fengxin and Mu Qing. "Save the child first. Take Qi away, and don't let him continue to wreak havoc outside." Finishing his instructions, Shilin ran toward the palace with the child in his arms. Fengxin received the command, his expression back to normal, and picked up the raging Qi before following after Shilin. The soldiers guarding the palace gates thought that it was strange to see the crown prince racing back, having only left a short while ago. But naturally, they wouldn't stop him. Thus, Shilin ran straight to the medical pavilion and entered the infirmary, leaving Fengxin and Mu Qing outside the door with Qi under arrest. The crown prince rarely returned to the palace and rarely made demands, so the imperial doctors naturally rushed over. Shilin placed that young child in a chair and said, "Thanks in advance, everyone. This child was beaten by a number of adults, got stuffed into a gunny sack and dragged on the roads. Please check for me if there are any head injuries first. That's the most important thing." The imperial medical team had never seen a royal or a noble bring a dirty wild babe for them to heal before, but they also knew that they needed to do whatever they were told to, and they all acknowledged Shilin's direction. One of them spoke, "Put your hands down first, little kid." However, although that young child was docile in Shilin's arms the whole time, he started struggling then and firmly covered the right side of his face, refusing to let go no matter what. No matter how skilled the imperial doctors were, if the patient didn't cooperate, there wasn't anything that they could do. The doctors looked to Shilin. "Your Highness, how?" Shilin raised his hand. "He's probably afraid of strangers. Don't worry, let me." That child was sitting in a chair, and Shilin couldn't meet his eyes, so he bent forward and inclined his head. "What's your name?" he asked. The large eye of that child stared at him intently. His obsidian black pupil reflected a snow-white silhouette. This gaze, if it must be described, was exactly like Fengxin had said, possessed by the devil, and shouldn't be the gaze of a child. It was a moment before the child lowered his head. "Hong," he said in a tiny and soft voice. He mumbled as if he didn't want to say it, as if he was a little embarrassed. Shilin only sort of heard the word Hong and asked again, "How old are you?" 10, the child replied. Shilin was only asking offhandedly, hoping to lower his guard, but hearing that the child said 10, he was startled. He thought, "I thought that he was only 7 or 8, but he's 10? This child is truly weak and emaciated." After a pause, Shilin smiled softly. "The doctors will see to your wounds now. Don't be afraid and lower your hands, okay?" That child heard, but hesitantly shook his head. "Why not?" Shilin asked. The child was silent for a while before replying. "Ugly," he said. His response was just the one word, and no matter how Shilin soothed, he refused to remove his hands. Shilin promised that he wouldn't think him ugly, that he wouldn't look, but turning around wouldn't do either. Such a young age, but such obstinance. Without much choice, the imperial doctors could only ask him a few questions, have him recognize a number of fingers, make sure that he didn't feel faint or have any headaches, make sure that he understood what he saw and what he thought, and then tend to his physical wounds. As the imperial doctors worked, they became more and more awed. Shilian guarded on the side, and hearing their sounds of wonder, he asked, "How is he, everyone?" One of the imperial doctors couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, did this little kid really get beaten and dragged on the roads in a gunny sack?" Shilian was speechless. Why should that be false? The imperial doctor replied, "If that really was the case, then amazing. I have never seen anyone so tenacious. He has 5 broken ribs and a broken leg, a number of injuries, big and small. Even with all of that added together, he remains conscious and converses while sitting up. Even adults would find this difficult to do, never mind a 10-year-old child." Hearing how severe the injuries were, Shilian became even more furious at Qirong. He looked at the child and saw that he was sitting there on the chair as if he felt no pain, and was peeking at him with that large black left eye. When he noticed that he was caught staring by Shilian, he immediately turned his head away.